Hey there, my name is Jordi, and in this video I'm going to show you how I'm going to go from a little idea I have into my very first prototype. When I'm building out my ideas, I usually start with making the very first version in 2 hours. If I cannot make it in 2 hours, I will just not do it. So this app I'm going to make today is basically an app to quickly visualize data. So I just finished this workout bootcamp thing for a few weeks, and at the end I got all these results from measuring my body, and based on that I wanted to visualize that with nice graphs instead of just keeping photographs of the data. So I figured, okay, I'm just going to make a very simple app that allows me to just put in numbers and it will make a graph out of it. Nothing fancy, doesn't need to be more than that. Worst case, I use it for this specific thing. Best case, I can release it. Maybe some people will like it as well. So I start usually with just a very simple navigation view and a list with some fake data. So I pretend like this is the type of data that I would want to have, or the type of display I would want to have. So in this case, I would want to do skeletal muscle mass, and I wanted to do maybe percent body fat. And just fill in the numbers themselves, and this is really to try to figure out how should these views, what should they look like. So for stuff like this I don't really do design beforehand, it's all just in SwiftUI because it's just as easy to do. So here I'm initially just trying to put some data there, but I quickly realized that it doesn't really work, because then you'll just have a lot of values there. It will take up a lot of space. So pretty soon I will start adjusting that, and I will take that away. But it's good to just try it out as you go, because with the previews you can see it, and then okay, this is what it looks like. So now I'm making a placeholder view for where the chart would be. So I'm just using a simple section cell, just removing the insets to make it fill the full cell, and then I can make it a little bit taller. Something like this could work, especially because it's a home dashboard kind of view. You don't need to make it too big. And then what you would actually want is just to just have a link to a detail page with navigation link to just go to a page where all the data is presented, and that allows me to just remove a lot of the other stuff. And so what I do now is I basically make a new view for the detail. So I start with just a super simple view. So I just took the data I already had, add a little title, and then just present that detail view. Again, it doesn't need to work here in this phase. This is just to think, okay, what kind of information do I want to display at what position? And from here on you can make it look a little bit nicer. So in this case I put the fake data in a separate section, and then I add an extra section for adding data. And now I'm also making sort of the content of the data cells, trying to think, okay, do I want the date here as well? Do I want to show when something was measured, or exactly like when something was added? Again, like just keep it as simple as possible. And what I'm doing now is a bit of a, like, it's not really necessary, because I'm just copying all these files of all these lines in there one by one, when I should just have done the 1 minute extra step to just make it a variable already, like returning a sum view. But I mean, this kind of gets the job done, and I hope that I don't change the numbers. I think I'm going to add the numbers, which obviously doesn't matter. Like, you don't need to put the numbers in here because you're going to delete this all later. But it's pretty good, because now after 5 minutes the main functionality of the app is basically there. So now it's just a matter of making it work. So obviously you want to be able to add new data so that you can quickly add a new value, but we'll come back to that in a little bit. So now it's time to actually make the model, because now we need to decide, okay, what kind of data do we want to keep track of, and what's the the minimum amount of data that we need to actually make this stuff. So for the data, I always just usually start with a simple ID, title, and then probably just an array of stuff, right? You can make this super complicated, but for the initial part, you don't need more than this. So most of the work here goes into naming the things. Should it be data points? Should it be points? All of these things don't really matter at all. You could name it whatever you want, because you're probably just going to change this at some point. So the more you do these things, so the more you make these small apps, the easier these steps go, so that you don't have to think about this process anymore, because you know that you can always change it and refactor it later, and it's going to take a few minutes and it'll be perfectly fine. So in this case, I decided to just go for data points. So we have a simple data object that has an array of data points. These data points just have a date and a value, nothing more. Obviously there's more that you could want from this, but yeah, it's not important. Since I want to use charts later, I thought, okay, I need to make these data points plottable, but then when I added it, they wanted to do this primitive plottable type that I've never really heard of, so I decided, alright, I'm just going to remove it, and if I need it in the future, it's going to give me another error then, but so far it didn't. So what I'm doing now is I'm cleaning up the project a little bit. Usually I don't do this for the first 2 hours, but sometimes it's nice just to clean it up a little bit. So in this case, all the data detail stuff is on a separate file. It's easier for me to make changes to it later, and it also allows you to group the export, the imports to just the files that need it. So now I can actually start using this data that I know I'm going to be passing at some point. So in the preview, I pass fake data, but what I'll do pretty early on is I will make separate files for the model as well, so that I can more easily make example data as well to use in previews. And I'm doing the same for the data point as well. So the data detail now needs simple sample data. In this case, I don't have any data yet, so it's easier for me to make some example data. So I always forget the logic for that, so I've just used it in the past for other projects. So I just use Clipboard Manager to quickly copy that. This is from Sticky Timers in this case. So I just return a simple data object, and then I can just put whatever I want in there. It's super useful because this way it's very easy to see actual real data in your previews while you're working on it. So I'm just using some random stuff here, and it's just adding some simple test data. For the data points, I don't really need example data because it's such a simple object. So adding some time intervals so that it's a little bit so that it's different times, different days, but you don't really need to do this otherwise. Like, it's not super important because it's just about pre-populating the data. So the next step would be to start breaking these things together and actually make it work. So now when I run the app, I just have fake data in here. Everything is just fake. So I usually use the defaults SPM package, which is basically an easier way to work with UserDefaults. It allows you to use SwiftUI syntax to get your UserDefaults data, which I think is always super nice because it allows you to use UserDefaults like a state object. So just copy code from another project, just change the name of the app group ID, remove a bunch of stuff that you're not using, and then I can basically say, okay, what's the type of data I want to store. Again, this is much more about what's the right name and not necessarily difficult to do. But you can see me here thinking, okay, what should this name be here? And I forgot to copy a certain point or cut it off, so I had to go back a little bit and then went back on the name in a little second. Again, all these things don't matter. The name doesn't matter because this code, a lot of the times this code will be fine, but it's also fine if you have to refactor it at some point. So now I can import the data. If I know the name, I always forget what's the correct syntax, but yeah, I can just say data, and now I can populate the list with, so I'm gonna change the name, make sure it's codable and default serializable, so that it's actually, I can use it with the defaults SPM package, and do the same for the data point, make that codable and default serializable as well, just so it works. So these are steps that I always have to do. So basically I should start every project with just adding defaults, because that's what I use for everything. Yeah, import defaults here as well. So now we're 10 minutes in, and we basically have the data model and the persistence set up as well. So in this case, I just present a list of the saved data, and here I'm running into the names, like it should not be called data, it should be, I don't know, visuals or something. Rename that to visuals as well, visuals. Now I can just say, for each visual, basically make a section that looks how we want it to look, and I can remove the other one. And instead of the placeholder text, I can use the actual title, and we don't need this anymore, so we can just remove the other one. I save it here in case I want to add it later, but I'm not going to use it anymore, so I could have just removed it, because again, if you need to add it again, it's 1 minute extra work. It's better to be fast than to be thorough with this stuff. Also because by doing these things, a lot of the times you get better at it by doing it, so it's better to sometimes do things twice, because then you get better and faster at it. So now our next step will be to actually make it useful and make it look nice. So we need to add a button so that we can actually add some data. Doesn't really matter what this looks like. You just put a button in the list or put it in a toolbar. But these things, again, it's not about design here. It's about, okay, what kind of functionality do I want in the app, and how can I test out if the idea is good, if there's something I would use. And when you have these things, usually I make a first version like I'm doing now. So I start with a button in the list, and I think, it should actually be just in the toolbar, because otherwise it gets in the way. So by doing it and seeing it, you actually can iterate on it much quicker. So now I just add a simple default visual whenever you click on new, and as you can see, it works. Test data still, but the functionality of the app is ready basically. So now it's a matter of actually adding the data and presenting the data in the detail view. So for each point, basically take the point date, format it nicely. It doesn't really matter what the formatting looks like. Don't spend time getting the formatting to exactly right to show the exact date. All that stuff you can look at later. You can Google it and try to find which one you want, but for now it's just about adding something that works, and then tweaking can come later. This is all the tweaking you should just not do basically. So now when you click on the visual, you get some extra data, but nothing's there because all of these don't have any data. So now we actually need to let users add data, add visuals to the app. So we want to make the values look nice, so we just use 2 decimals or 1 decimal, I guess in this case even. Get rid of code that we don't want to use the preview to see what it looks like. Obviously it doesn't look perfect, but it's functional and gets the job done. So now you can move on to the next thing, which is getting the charts to work and getting users to actually add in the values themselves. So what we're doing now is we're keeping track of which visuals are in there without having to use defaults. So I'm just, for testing purposes, adding a couple of examples so that I can actually use the app, and I can run it, click on all data, and then when you click on it, you can actually see something. Later on, I'm just gonna revert back to the defaults, but for now, it's not really necessary. So now I want to add the chart into it, and I haven't really done a lot with charts in the last month. So for something like this, I don't dig into how the charts API works. What I do is I just go to, there's this project that's on GitHub with a bunch of open repositories, open examples. This is not the project, but this is the simplest chart I can make. Just copy the code, don't care about what it looks like, don't care about the design. Just put it in. And a lot of the time, just the most basic example will get you there, or at least will get you to think about what it should look like. So in this case, we need some data. So obviously we need our points, because that's the only thing that the chart cares about. It's just, okay, just make some points. And it doesn't need to be a state, because it's just a one-time thing that we just want to present once. We made it identifiable, so it works a bit nicer. We can just use the date here and the value. In this case, it's just date and value. Then there's some foreground style that we probably want to tweak later, but it's not important for now. And now when we actually add the visual chart instead of the color, we should start. Yeah, so now we have our first chart. Obviously some of the framing is wrong now because we've framed it to be 160 height right now, but the chart itself does not have the correct height. So we take that stuff out and put it in the visual chart view just to keep everything clean. And the issue now is that this one is 160. So obviously you would want to maybe hide the legend, or I'm not sure, the legend, and the dates probably don't have to be there because it's only about this line, right? But this is basically functionally now you have what you need. You have an overview with charts, and you can click on one of the charts to get more information and see all the data. So now all that we need to add is a way for you to add to actually add values into it. So right now there's no data, so you could do stuff like, if the points are empty, show no points instead of the chart. Sure, you can do that, but it's not important for these first few minutes. It's not important at all. It just needs to work for you in the simplest way. And if there's any polish, you can do that later, but this is only about just getting it to work as fast as possible. So in this case, I'm adding the option to delete the app, or delete the individual sections, because you need to be able to delete some. And for some reason, I'm not really sure why, I also added the option for moving. I guess it's, yeah, so the reason I wanted to also do moving is that so that users could put their favorite visuals higher than the other ones. It's also one line of code, so it doesn't really matter. It's quick to add. And so now you can actually delete visuals. It doesn't look perfect because it only swipes on the chart, but it doesn't matter for now. And by allowing the moving, I can also try out some stuff like, hey, do I want different charts in different positions? What I want to use. So now all that we need to do is let people add a new visual. So just gonna make a very simple bottom sheet with the new D10s API, which basically lets you just click on new, it will pop up something, user puts in a name and saves it, and then it's added to the list, and people can add data by going to the detail view. You can add those things together, but it's not worth it right now because you need to always have the option to let users change stuff in the detail view, so just keep it separate for now. It doesn't matter that there's an extra step for users because we're not focusing now on perfect usability, we're focusing on just testing out the idea in as little time as possible, ideally less than 2 hours, and in this case in less than 30 minutes. So just start with a simple navigation view, a title and a text field, and all we need now is just a button to actually save it. So in the content view we do a check to see, okay, a variable, do we show it or not, and then we just present a sheet based on if show new is true or false, and then we have our create new visual sheet that we show with this detend API that's added in iOS 16. So we can say, okay, we just want it to be presented at medium height, so that doesn't take up the full space and just looks nice. You could also do a normal sheet, doesn't really matter, but since there's only one input field, it's not really worth it. So we make the list a little bit nicer by adding sections. Not really necessary. If I look at it now, probably shouldn't have done it, but yeah. Here I was thinking, oh, I want people to also be able to add multiple values. So I was searching these text fields, how to actually do the formatting of a text field. So how to format text fields for numbers. There's all these examples here by Apple. We'll use this later on the detailed page, but then I realized, yeah, if I want to do this, I need to add stuff to this particular view as well to keep track of all the ones that users added, and it can get very clogged very quickly. So pretty soon I will decide to just take it out and say, okay, yeah, it's not necessary right now, and then I just replace it with a button, and the button just lets you save or create new visual. And I just use this bordered prominent style because it looks a little bit more like a button, but as you can see, it kind of looks ugly right now. So what I want to do is I want to, when the user saves, just add it to the list of visuals in our persistent storage. So basically we create a new simple data object whenever and I actually refactor it because it's no longer, it should just be visual, because that's the new name came up with basically. And so we add a new visual to the array, and the name should be the title that the user typed in, and the data point should be empty for now. And we want to dismiss the view whenever it's presented. And then we take all this code out, clean it up a little bit, and then we basically have our functioning view. Now the button doesn't look as nice, so make the button look a little bit nicer. So we take away the background and fill the content all the way to the edges, and just make the background clear. And now we make the button the full width, and obviously this is not perfect, but it's a simple way to do this without having to worry too much about design. Make the button look a little bit nicer, and there you have a nice button, and this functionally just gets the job done. So now what we can do is we can actually show what it looks like from the content view. So when you have your main view and you click new, right now that button doesn't do anything because the button isn't connected. So I need to add that here, and the sheet is only in the list, so it needed to be in the total list and not in the individual cell, because there's no cells at the start. So present a new visual, just type some fake data, create visual, and there you have the data. And right now it's empty because there's no data in there. If you click on all data, you see there's no data, but right now there's no way to actually add data. So that's the last step. And once we do that, we can actually use the full app. And that's the point where you stop and just play around with it first to determine, okay, what else would I want to have in this app. So I took the sample code from Apple to see how do these text fields work that have a specific double modifier, so that formatter, so that the format is always a double file, a double object. Got some of the syntax wrong here, so I'm gonna go back to Apple's sample code soon and actually get their example for the number formatter. So just copy that, doesn't matter if you just copy this without knowing how it works, because this phase is just about making something as quickly as possible that gets the job done. So just testing it out. Can I actually change these numbers? And I can. Now, what does this text field should look like? It could also just be like it is right now with just the text field at the top, but I thought, okay, it might be a bit nicer to have a title on the left side and then have the text field be on the right. Yeah, and just formatting a little bit, so trying to see why is it not all the way to the right side, why is it not on the trailing edge. For text fields you have to use the multi-line text view alignment thing, put it to trailing, it can be even smaller, and font a little bit bigger, and yeah, that's fine. So just remove the background, and now you have functioning thing. And now when user clicks does an onSubmit on the text field, we actually want to add it to the array, which is super simple at this point, but the problem is that this visual right now is not a binding, so we need to change it so that we actually have access to the binding, to the actual visual. And now we can just very quickly make a new data point, current date, and add the double value that's currently in new value. And now we need to go back to content view to make sure that it can actually deal with this binding that we now have for the visual instead of the normal one. So as you can see, that's really simple to add as well. So now we are almost at the point where it's working. So we can add data. We can say, okay, we want to add some test data in there. There's some placeholder text in the background that doesn't look nice, but we can change it later. And you can see that we have a chart, and it actually works. Chart doesn't look perfect yet, but yeah, it's close to what we need. So now there's a little bit of time for some small tweaks, just to make sure that it looks a little bit nicer. Don't spend more than 3 minutes on this, because yeah, at this point you already have a functioning thing that you can play around with and try to see what you need. So in this case, make some test data so that I can actually see what it looks like. I see this double thing here in the background, which is obviously not nice, and see the chart looking a little bit dodgy. So trying to figure out best ways to do this. Make the chart a little bit less high. Yeah, not really doing here anything meaningful. I didn't know exactly how to remove the legends on the side, the axis charts, otherwise I would have done it, but I didn't want to look it up and it wasn't super important for now. And so this double, just change it to 0 so that it looks nicer. And basically now there's a full functioning app that you can use to test out your ideas. You can use it yourself a little bit, quickly adding the option to remove data points as well. Again, 2 lines of code, so it's not worth it to not add it. But yeah, so now you're basically at a point where you can try out the app. You can see if it works for you. You can see what kind of stuff you would need, what kind of visualizations work. Do you want there to be an easier way to add data or something? But yeah, this is basically a very quick way to start testing out, okay, is this something that I would use? And from here you can start sharing with your friends and get feedback. So hopefully that was helpful. I'm curious to hear what you think.